first of all, do you agree to the terms? If not, you don't get to participate. And if you do, and you're doing all these engaging in bad faith, you're just going to lose. Wouldn't it be amazing to walk away from a debate with a better understanding, all of us, of the issue being debated about? Democrats think that only 30% of Republicans support sensible gun control. It's something like 70%.
Sure.
And
Depending
like
how you define
Democrats
it, yeah.
and Republicans think that like 50% of the other side thinks violence is justified, and it's only like 5%. It's like we're basically fighting with mirages.
You think that you're bringing people from the left and the right together, but it's because the left and right beliefs you have are very outer perimeter beliefs, but you are actually wholly unified in your anti-establishment beliefs. I understand in theory how that works, but I just kind of feel like the most disliked by everybody. But thanks for the...
No, but you're probably you're less disliked than somebody that they really hate.
No, yeah, that's
you know what I mean?
Probably true, yeah.
So...
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Bridges. I am joined today by Stephanie Lepp, producer and storyteller, and perhaps a radical centrist that I'm about to do battle with on the both sidesing of all political issues.
Not a radical centrist, so that might be hard, but we'll see where we land.
Okay.
Yeah. No, well, that's an important kind of thing to talk through. So we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Yeah.
What's your background in this world, I guess?
In this world, this world of...
If you were catching somebody up from my world who is in the online political horrible space.
Yeah. I can tell a personal story that,
whatever story you want.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, my first kind of real experience with political activism was completely alienating. I was a freshman in college. I was a freshman at Stanford, and I joined the Redwood Action Team at Stanford, acronym RATS, for a city council meeting in Mendocino to protest the logging of the Northern California redwoods. And at the time, an activist named Julia Butterfly Hill, some of your people in your audience might remember her, was living in one of those redwoods, right? So we get to the protest.
Oh my God, I know.
Yeah, you remember her.
Yeah, she lived in a tree for like 200 days or something.
She lived in a tree for almost 2 years.
Yeah,
so
okay, yeah.
we called her, to her tree, on speakerphone, on a mobile phone, and she gives us this pep talk, and it's all very exciting. But I noticed something strange. Well, I noticed two things, actually. The first thing I noticed was that the people who we were protesting against just looked like, these were the loggers and their families, just looked like very humble people, right? They were mostly migrant workers from Mexico. And I just thought to myself, I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't really want to be on the opposite side from those people. I want to be on the same side as the trees and the people. The way these lines, I didn't know anything about sustainable development at the time, but I knew enough to know, like, the way these lines are drawn just does not make sense to me. So that was like one observation. And that kind of confusion marked the end of my involvement with rats and really politics for a while, and the beginning of a fascination with, I don't know what I would have called it at the time, but what I can now call integrating different perspectives. That was one observation. I guess I might as well just mention the second one because it is also relevant to the second thing I noticed was we go in and to the city council meeting, and the spokesperson from RATS is testifying, right, to the city council, and he's talking all about, like the endangered spotted salamander and the endangered owl and all these, endangered species that, are going to die if the redwoods are logged. And I'm looking over at the city council members, and their eyes are just glazed over. Like, they've heard this a million times, I can tell. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is not changing their minds. I don't know what would change their minds, but I know it's not this. So I kind of came out of that experience with this question of, like, how do we redraw the lines to get more of us on the same side of things? And it's like, how do people actually change their hearts and minds? Yeah.
Okay. So nothing like some good political activism to
alienate me and inspire me to ask bigger questions. Yes. Yeah.
When you're looking at, or from there, catch us up to...
From there, I ended up going into philosophy and dance. And And I mean, that's what I studied. I studied. It's a mouthful. The name of the field is called Science, Technology, and Society.
Okay.
It's actually just philosophy and sociology of technology.
Interesting. Okay.
It was very interesting. It was great. Well, I went into philosophy because I wanted to do philosophy. And once I got in there, I found out that all you do is like study other people's philosophies and maybe like tinker with like some like little detail of their, and I was like, well, where do I go where I get to make it?
Mm-hmm.
And so philosophy of technology is like a newer and like for obvious reasons, like evolving realm of philosophy. So that's what I ended up going into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was this like a master's program or for
No,
undergrad?
This is undergrad.
Okay.
This is undergrad.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it took me a long time to understand, although you probably could have seen it very clearly if you were like paying attention to me, or if I had been paying attention to the things that I actually enjoyed, that storytelling. I mean, and honestly, it's like I'm in media, but media, what I'm interested in is ideas more than anything else. Media just happens to be a vehicle through which I can share and communicate ideas. I wouldn't call myself like a film person or like a, I happen to work with video. I happen to work with audio. I work with stories, but more than anything else, I'm working with ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you, so today, what would you say your main, I guess, mission statement is? I know that Kyla and a few other people picked this out because I'm personally going through, it's very difficult to balance. You talked about like who's on both sides of an issue,
yes.
like how much leeway do you give to somebody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is my brain is half fried
my mission
right
statement. No worries. It's all good. Take another sip of coffee.
No. I'll be honest, this is not coffee. This is hot chocolate. Okay.
Oh, how nice. I love that. It's funny. It's funny that it's hot chocolate because at first I was like, damn, that's a lot of coffee. But now that I know it's hot chocolate, it's like,
just
what
sugar,
a sweet gift you're giving yourself in the morning. Don't worry. My mom gets that size of a caramel macchiato with extra caramel. No joke.
Okay.
So it's just her excuse for having a melted Snickers bar in the morning and calling it coffee. So
it's basically the same one that I thought, yeah.
Do you.
When you're looking at political issues today,
yes.
and you're seeing people on different sides of a political issue,
yes.
I guess what's your approach to figuring out like how much should somebody moderate an opinion? How much should you try to like meet somebody in the middle? Are there some issues that are like non-negotiables? I guess how do you approach that? Yeah.
So, well, I guess maybe it's worth kind of elaborating a little bit. Like I'm coming from, one of the places I come from, I could say, is synthesis in the Hegelian sense, right? And the idea very simply is just you have one idea, a thesis, you have an opposing idea, an antithesis, and then you attempt to integrate them into some kind of like higher order or more complex view, a synthesis, right? And we could use a metaphor, and then I'll distinguish it from both sidesism. But there are many metaphors. I use one of them is, which actually sounds like both sidesism, but I'm just going to use it anyway. One of them is parallax vision, right? Like what we see out of our left eye is slightly different than what we see out of our right eye. They're both true but partial, but it's only by looking through both eyes together that the world goes from flat to 3D. Right, so we gain depth. That's not to say that like both eyes, in this case, yes, both eyes are like equally right, but there are other metaphors that maybe get. But that's kind of the sense is you're integrating the different perspectives in order to gain a more comprehensive view. Now, synthesis does get confused with both sidesism, right? Both sidesism is the idea that all perspectives are equally relevant or valuable. Right, it also gets confused with centrism, but centrism is just kind of like the halfway point between the extremes, which means you're letting yourself be defined by the extremes. Right, the way that I kind of like to explain the distinction is that it's unlikely that one side is entirely right. Right, that's tribalism. It's also probably unlikely that all sides are equally right. Right, that's both sidesism. It's also probably unlikely that what's right is just like right in the middle of what everyone is saying. What's most likely is that most of us are partially right and some of us are more right than others, which doesn't make for a great tagline. But that's kind of what's up when you're contending with the full complexity. right? Of reality, or of whatever issue you happen to be focused on.
Yeah. For that past thing that you just said, of all the people that identify as like centrist or moderate, how many do you think have that particular point of view?
I don't know.
Okay. I would say like almost nobody.
Yeah, I would say, and like, I don't mean to, and by the way, synthesis itself can totally be weaponized. It's not like synthesis is the end all be all answer. We can talk about how it gets weaponized, but with centrism, I don't mean to totally dunk on, it's like, I think of centrism as kind of like training wheels. Like if you're so on one side of things, yeah, like probably it's a good exercise to force yourself to try to just like articulate a centrist position. But in the sense of training wheels, like once you're pretty balanced, you can let go of the training wheels and just go for as much complexity as you can handle, right?
I think, I don't know why, I think I stumbled into a lot of just very useful epistemic tools when I was in high school. I grew up very Catholic, went to a Catholic grade school, and then I went to a Jesuit Catholic high school. And at some point, 15 to 17, I kind of become atheist. And in that transitionary period, are you familiar with Ayn Rand? So I end up reading Anthem, and then I read Atlas Shrugged. And for probably 6 to 12 months, I'm just like full on like, oh my God, this is great. Like this is the solution to all of philosophy and all of ethics. This is amazing. And then at some point, I think it was like just as my senior year of high school starts, I have this like feeling, and I'm like, okay, I went from being Catholic with no choice of my own because I just grew up into it. And then the very first philosopher that I picked up, I wholly fell in love with their philosophy and just became completely and totally taken by it. And I'm like, geez, maybe I'm just like very easily influenced. Okay. And one of the things, I guess, revelations I had was that it's not good to be controlled 100% by somebody, to have no,
subject object.
Yeah, or to have no like normative autonomy. Like I have no foundation for my own like ethical or ontological understanding of any part of the world. Right? I'm just buying into somebody else's.
Right.
But it is equally as bad to be like to define yourself as the opposite of
totally.
that. Yeah.
Totally.
And there's a really hard time, I think, sometimes when I argue with people or when I tell people, I can tell when somebody is like, how do you feel about, the FDA, or how do you feel about, I guess like DEI or anti-wokeism or whatever. Like it applies to both sides of people.
Yeah.
This isn't like unique to one group. But yeah, somebody will give me an opinion. It's like, oh, okay, I understand. If this person says this thing, you're going to believe the exact opposite of whatever that is.
And you're letting yourself be defined by the precise thing that you say you're against.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and often the first step, I mean, this is something I learned. I used to produce a podcast called Reckonings, which is all about how people expand their worldviews. Every episode tells the story of someone who had some kind of worldview transformation. And often the first step we go in is 180 degrees in the opposite direction, right? That's like it's like, okay, it's not this. So therefore, let me just go 180 degrees. And then you're like, wait a second, there are 360 degrees in this circle. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, maybe this isn't even a circle. Maybe it's a sphere.
Yeah, sure.
And then you're like, I don't even know what this is. Whatever it is, I want to explore it and get to know it more intimately. But yeah, the first step can sometimes be 180. But ideally, you maybe only have to do 180 once or twice in order to kind of get the sense that there is a bigger
picture,
dimension. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I've been doing a lot recently, because it feels weird to say specialty or career, but I guess I do online, I do debate basically.
Yeah.
And broadly speaking, I'm engaged in, I guess, like rhetoric. Like my goal is, I think I have better ideas. I would like to convince as many people to believe my ideas as possible. And there's this whole world of, depending on who I'm talking to, depending on what we're talking about, and then depending on what the platform we're on is going to change my approach to how I have that conversation, basically.
Right.
And especially over the past year or 2 years, I've tried a lot to map out why do people believe the things that they believe, and it's very difficult because people will use words or say things that are a proxy for something else. They might not realize it. I don't realize it oftentimes. What do you think are the major driving forces behind how people arrive at their particular political persuasions or opinions, or I guess other opinions like that?
I mean, it's like how people arrive. It's like their entire life story, basically. I mean, when I used to, produced this. And granted, Reckonings wasn't like a scientific investigation, but I racked up somewhere around 200 hours of interviews with people who, it was like deeply conservative congressmen who made what he would call a spiritual conversion on climate change and stayed conservative, but all the way to, the architect of Facebook's business model who realized he was addicted to his phone, had a reckoning, and has since devoted his life to tackling technology addiction, all the way to former white supremacist who transcended a life of violence. But always, it's like, how did you, it's your story too. It's like, I was raised Catholic, and I think your mother is from Cuba. I mean, it's like it's your entire life story often that leads you, and then sometimes you'll have you had an Ayn Rand experience. Usually it's not information that changes people's views, because people often only trust information that confirms what they already believe. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I can share, I used to have this highly unscientific kind of running list of things before I started the show, because this was a question for me. It's like, how do people change? How do I know? It's like, I didn't even know what search term to Google. It's like, I know behavioral am I looking for worldview transformation? Is that even a thing? Like, I know behavioral economics is a thing, but I'm not looking to find out what makes people floss their teeth more often. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so I had this like highly unscientific list of things that I thought, it was like falling in love, near-death experiences, birth of a first child, sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes information. And what I learned over the course of interviewing many people is that it's not that those things make us change. What things like that have in common, or what they do, is that they reveal to us the difference between who we think we are and who we actually are, or the difference between the impact we think we're having on the world and the impact we're actually having on the world. And it's seeing that difference, it's seeing that gap that initiates the process of transformation. And I can be more specific and go into specific stories, but that I mean, I guess I should, like, if you're talking to someone like at your Thanksgiving dinner table, or who's actually basing their opinions on information, which is rare, then you can use things like, under what circumstances does what you're saying not apply? And they'll have an answer. Or like, what would it take to change your position? And they will hopefully have and if they don't have an answer, then obviously then that's, but for the most part, like you said, like you have to get into like, why are people believing what is their goal? What are their values? And it's by getting into that and seeing maybe how they're not actually achieving the goal that they profess to have, that can initiate a process of transformation.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the more frustrating things that I kind of notice is, I feel like if somebody were to say, somebody has a strong position, and I were to ask, why do you think that? And they were to say, I grew up this way. My mom and dad told me this. This is just like, I've always been around this. This is what makes the most sense to me. I think I'd be okay with that. And I'd be like, oh, okay, that's good. Mm-hmm. But I think it's kind of an anti-Western, I guess, way of conceptualizing it. But if I say we fetishize like scientism or information too much, and everybody wants to have this like, oh, well, actually, I'm very data-driven, and I've arrived at my own unique opinion or whatever, which I actually think is great. I like that. But I don't like it when people think that, and that's not what's happened at all, because it gets harder to move somebody, or even to make them aware of where their opinion comes from.
Yeah.
And I've noticed it's funny, you've said two things so far. Usually when I'm talking to somebody to try to get a gauge of like, how much do I think this person has engaged at any level of, like self-interrogation of beliefs, I'll ask somebody like, oh, how do you know if you're correct on something? Uh-huh. And there are concrete specific answers that you can give, and then there are the platitudes. Yeah. And the platitudes are always like the aesthetic of, oh, I've thought through this. And then there are two of the...
And I've said them.
No, you've said two of the concrete things that I think are really important. One is you should be able to convincingly argue the other side of an argument. Yeah. If you can't, you have no understanding of your own argument. Yeah. And then the second one... is somebody should be able to ask you, what would it take to change your mind on this? And if you can't even conceive of something. Yeah. And it's very funny because I thought I was, at one point in life, I thought I was very clever. I was like, oh my God, like this is a good question to ask somebody to really get them to think. Uh-huh. And I'd say about half the time, it's like, what would it take to change your mind on this? Someone would just say nothing. And I'm like, oh.
You're honest. At least you're honest.
I guess, yeah. But I'm like, that's a crazy statement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I find so, yeah, I guess there's a frustrating aspect of everybody thinks that they're more, I guess, discreet in arriving at their beliefs than they actually are. And then sometimes it's really hard to change people's minds because they are unaware of how much their environment, I guess, has influenced them on a particular thing. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to change somebody's mind on a thing, what are things that you consider, I guess? That's very open-ended question, so you can be more specific. Or
I also don't, I mean, I do use the word change, but I honestly think in terms of not changing someone's mind, but expanding. Mm-hmm. It's like expanding the aperture. Like you're probably, you might be locked into some like partial truth. It's not to say it's not it's probably part of the picture, but let's like expand the picture. So yeah, it's back to the, like, if it's someone who, you know, is maybe, you know, basing their opinions on actual information, then those kinds of questions of under what circumstances does what you're saying not apply, or what would it take to change, or like what are the negative potential externalities or consequences of what you're proposing, like anything that gets, or how would you steelman the opposing perspective? So any of that's for people who are maybe like, it's more information based, but if it is coming from a more not as examined place of values, then I just want to understand what they care the most about. Like what is your goal? What are you the most interested in? And then from there, I think we can have a deeper conversation. But I don't know, it might be interesting to get specific. I do happen to be working on right now a project that is designing a format for debate. Okay. So I would love to share that with you. And then the project that I just released, which is actually how I found you. I just released a video series that someone in your audience said you should star. It's a series. Mm-hmm. Proposed you as a potential star for one in the series. Gotcha. So, and they're very relevant to what we're talking about. So maybe it just helps things get more concrete.
You've done one of these on abortion? Is this?
You watched one of them.
Yeah,
okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's basically just so it's called Faces of X. It's a series of short videos that integrates different perspectives on culture war issues like abortion, gender, and race. The format is very simple. Mm-hmm. I use that Hegelian triad of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's the same person playing all three. So it's the same person kind of steelmanning, wearing different outfits, steelmanning the different sides, and then synthesis walks in the door and attempts to offer some kind of integrated or more comprehensive perspective. The series stars kind of cultural influencers who are known as independent thinkers on these issues, but ultimately the series is not really about the issues. It's ultimately about kind of cultivating our capacity to integrate different perspectives and see reality in a more multi-dimensional way, but in a way that is like short and like internet friendly and simple. So it is somewhat like pat in this like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but it's also something that I think is pretty rare online to really see the different sides like faithfully well represented, and then some kind of an attempt at integration. Yeah. When
you're trying to synthesize two different points of view, do you find that this is oftentimes like trivial insofar as long as people are willing to open their mind and consider something, it's easy? Or do you?
No, it's hard. The both sidesism is easy. Saying something like capitalism has upsides and downsides, it's like, great, thanks, cool. Like, what do I do with that? But synthesis, like, it is, I mean, many philosophers have written extensively about, that it's an art and a science. I can share three questions. Just to kind of distill it, I can share three questions that I asked myself in the process of writing the scripts. So one is, and they are actually pretty simple, but if you like take them seriously, it requires some thinking. So one is there an either or that can be flipped to a both and? That's one that can be helpful. Another is there an opportunity to shift from what's better, X or Y, to under what circumstances is X or Y useful? And then the third question is, are there perverse incentives, like the incentive to maximize short-term profit, or are there perverse incentives that if they were to be addressed would help alleviate the debate? Like those questions, those might be good questions to ask someone too, if you're in it, is like, can help you find some kind of synthesis between the different perspectives.
When you're, let's pick an issue.
Yeah.
So that we can,
Yeah.
We'll do something, maybe climate change.
Great.
Okay. So as applied here, your first question is, rather than
is there an either or? Yeah. So with climate, it's probably something, it's the like economy versus environment kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And
so you got one side is the most extreme version of one side is all fossil fuels need to be eliminated as soon as possible. The other side is the sun changes our climate. Who cares? Just burn whatever.
And what are we going to do? Like destroy our economy in the process? So
sure,
yeah. So it's like, it's obviously not it's similar to the COVID lives versus livelihoods. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not, we're not going to choose one or the other, right?
Yeah.
We cannot. They need these two things are in dynamic co-evolution with each other, the environment and our economy. So it's not like we're going to do one at the expense of the other. So that's probably a simple one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
under what circumstances?
Oh yeah. Okay. Wait. Oh, sorry. So for the first thing, so you just did the either or rather than either or.
Both and.
Both and. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second one was.
Is there an opportunity to shift from X or Y to under what circumstances X or Y? You just brought up fossil fuels. I think it'd be really nice I haven't seen this done, but I would love to see some kind of matrix that with like different energy sources. It's like wind, solar, fossil, nuclear, like all of them. And it's like under what circumstances, if any. And for some, you might say none. There are some and for others, you might say use them until we don't need to use them anymore because something has been achieved or something like that. So instead of renewal versus non-renewable, it becomes an under what circumstances do we use which ones in pursuit of a goal. Mm-hmm. And maybe there are some that we are in process of trying to wean ourselves off of, but we need them in order to get to ourselves to the place where we don't need them anymore. So it's like a more synthesis
graduated
kind of
version,
mm-hmm. strategy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the third point was
perverse incentives. Yeah. So for climate, I mean the perverse incentive there is one of them. We could just use the incentive to maximize short-term profit is obviously getting in the way of, and were we to eliminate the fiduciary duty, let's say, that would probably, if public companies were not held accountable to maximizing quarterly profits, that would probably free us up to address the climate issue much more easily. Because we wouldn't be up against these seemingly trade-offs that would no longer be there. Mm-hmm. And granted, fiduciary duty, we could even go upstream of that. What's upstream of the fiduciary? Go all the way up to as upstream as you want to go. But and I would say it's more upstream than capitalism. But dealing with those upstream kind of perverse incentives would definitely help alleviate the climate debate.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have any of this in my mind in terms of a frame of how I function, I guess, these particular terms. But there's, it's interesting because there are ways that I've approached a lot of these using other language that I've just kind of happened to stumble into or make my way there. One of the things that I talk to people about is very frustrating to me is I'll tell people don't get attached to a process. We really don't care. You should be attached to the outcome. That's generally what whatever ethical framework is usually aimed at some particular thing. Mm-hmm. For instance, if if you believe that we should maximize the well-being for as many people as possible, and you think people shouldn't be homeless, then you want to have people living in homes. And if you have some particular policy, say rent control or something, rent control is not the same as less homeless people.
Yeah.
If we were to discover that rent control doesn't help, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then we would say, okay, well, we ditch that. And I noticed there's a lot of
confusion of
Yeah,
the strategy and the goal.
Yeah, normative coupling or normative confusion, where you get these people that will, I say these people, but it's like, it's almost everybody, where you have this like, almost this like deontological obsession or attachment with like the process itself. And sometimes it feels like it inhibits people's ability. Like if I were to ask somebody some of these questions, like the either or versus the how can we incorporate this particular thing, it feels like I'm asking somebody, it feels like I'm, rather than saying, okay, you think that this particular thing isn't good, but aren't there like maybe certain circumstances where it could be? It feels like I'm asking somebody like, when do you think it would be okay to murder somebody? Like that's what it feels like the interpretation is.
Oh, they can't, their interpretation?
Yeah, because they can't even fathom that there's some, without you I don't think you realize how much you're hitting on so many of the frustrations I have with conversation right now, because if somebody was even expressing a lot of what you were saying, just saying these things, I would be like, okay, we're ahead of like 95% of the conversation right now. The idea that we could even consider like, hey, green energy is good, there are some drawbacks, how do we move in this direction, rather than green energy, oh, so you want to control my fucking life.
But we already do it in other domains of our lives, like as parents. I think parenting is the perfect example. It's like, I love the shit out of you and go the fuck to sleep. And those things just so deeply coexist, which is part of what kind of grows my heart and grows my mind as a parent, right? And or with something like you can take you can start with Michael Jackson. That it's like, how, do we continue listening to his? What do we do with the fact that he's like a spectacular entertainer and like likely a perpetrator of child sex abuse? How do we hold those? We do it with Thomas Jefferson. We do it all over the place, I think. So it's like maybe using, and with Michael Jackson, what would be the synthesis on Michael Jackson? It's like, okay, spectacular entertainer, likely perpetrator of child sex abuse. He was also the victim of abuse, right? And perhaps it's because he was the victim of abuse that he became such a spectacular entertainer and kind of a creep. Like maybe these things actually go together. So I think we can start with, we can give ourselves training wheels. I think we do already do this. We are able to hold dialectics in other domains of our lives. And it's just like showing us that we can do that. I mean, I shouldn't say it's not like just as simple as, but there is a way in which I think we already know how to do this. And it's just porting it into the realm of politics or into other more challenging areas.
I guess I feel like when it comes to politics, I apologize so much to any Hegelian scholars out there that abuse these words. But yeah, it feels like what synthesis is when it comes to political issues for the vast majority of people. Synthesis is actually just choosing whether you're going to eject the what is it, thesis versus the antithesis. Yeah, it's like, okay, well, which one of these am I totally ejecting? And then that's my synthesis.
Yeah.
This is actually fully evil or fully good.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well.
Well, I mean, my like absurdly idealistic take on that is that we, these dialectics actually need each other. Like innovation and tradition, like innovation is meaningless without tradition. And tradition is meaningless without innovation. Like they actually need each other to exist. Individual freedom and collective responsibility need each other. What choice and life, right? Like what is choice without life? What is life without choice? So we have almost like perfectly split ourselves into these dialectics that actually need each other in order to even exist. And so my joke is that we're actually like an amazing marriage waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Once we... And that's not even like how much of this is, it's not even entirely talking about perverse incentives. So much of this is obviously driven by our information ecosystem, right? The social media business model that is designed to maximize engagement and how that all happens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can go into that. But so I think we're more capable of this than our, than social media would indicate.
I think it doesn't necessarily maybe apply in the same way here, but when it comes to incentives, that's one of the things that I try to stress to people when you're looking to see why a particular group of people is acting in a way or why people have a certain belief, rather than starting with this, okay, well, let's analyze, does it make sense for somebody to think X, Y, Z? I usually just tell people like, okay, hold on, well, what would you be incentivized to think or feel here? And if the incentives are wrong, I would almost tell somebody you should abandon whatever you're trying to do and change the incentives, because the idea that you can have a misaligned incentive structure, but then rely on people to just make the right choice over and over and over again, again. It's just never
totally
gonna work.
And if we look at the incentives that drive social media, totally, it's like, how could we even expect to have, like, the fact that we even have long form, thoughtful conversations podcast, the Bridges podcast, is like a testament to the fact that they're actually, we are it's almost because we are like swimming upstream, and the fact that those even still exist and are growing in popularity, I think is a testament to the fact that we actually do want like healthy food. We want content that will help us grow.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. And then there's a lot of issues because I realized I went back and forth for a while between like, okay, I think people are pretty smart, to okay, people are just fucking stupid. You just need all the guy, and then and now I'm more
now
on
you're at the synthesis.
The synthesis, the synthesis is that people are incredibly smart, but depending upon what the issue is, you shut your brain off
and the
completely.
totally, and the context in which you're, and what the context is designed to do. Okay, so take a guess. So the person in your audience who proposed you for Faces of X, what before I tell you what issue they suggested, what issue do you think you would would you even be interested, I guess, is the first question, in being being in this video series? If so, what would be your issue? If not, what would have to change about the format to make it interesting to you? Broadly
speaking, something to do with MAGA?
That was not what the person said, but...
Okay, wait.
You would do Faces of MAGA? Do you feel like you could do a synthesis on MAGA? That would be cool.
I actually hate...
I know you do.
No. I hate doing the... there's a joke in my community that at the end of a debate, sometimes if the person is like a good moderator, he'll ask one person to steelman the other side.
And you don't like doing that?
No.
Why?
Because I'm not... Okay, I'm a really good debater. I'm not trying to whatever myself, okay? But like, if there's an issue that I can debate really well, I can always debate the other side really well, of course, because if you can't debate the other side, how would you even possibly know your own position? So it'll be very frustrating. One of the big topics that I've done the past year has been Israel-Palestine. And it'll be very frustrating that, they'll say like, okay, well, can you steelman Stephen's argument or steelman Destiny's argument? And they'll say like, well, I guess it sounds like he's just saying that the Palestinians have made mistakes, so they deserve getting genocided. And it'll be like, okay, Stephen, can you steelman their argument? And it's like, yeah, in 48, I can understand why a bunch of people would be upset that Israelis came over and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay. And by the end of it, obviously, whatever steelman construction of their argument, it's going to be better than the argument that they gave me. Like, I know all of the, usually people aren't even using the best arguments for their position. So then I end up in this stupid spot where...
They just let that sit.
Yeah, now I feel like I validated the other side so much. So now whenever somebody says, I was like, you go first, and then I'm going to give you a steelman that's as made of steel as the one that you give me, because this is insane.
I think it makes you look better, though. I think it validates your...
A little bit.
Because it's like he really knows his shit.
To my audience, it does. But sometimes the other side, they'll go like, yeah, obviously Stephen's position is completely and totally impossible, but he was able to steelman the other way.
In the debate format that I'm designing, he would lose points for that.
That's good.
Well, you would actually give him or not give him points for that.
Yeah. Wait, what was the topic that I'm curious?
The topic was free speech.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think? Would you and we can like spitball a little bit right now if we want to, but you would be kind of articulating and simplifying, because granted, many issues have more than two perspectives, and there can be more than two characters before synthesis comes in, but thus far it's just been simplified to two characters that are kind of going back and forth, and then the synthesis comes in. So how do you feel about do you feel like you would want to kind of faithfully represent the different sides of the free speech debate and then try to...
I could absolutely do that. I think it's a super fascinating conversation. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what the synthesis would be?
The synthesis is my position, obviously.
Is it?
Yeah. Well, hopefully, right? Obviously, right? You'd hope so, right?
Well, I mean, but for the people who were in the video, it wasn't clear, like, from the beginning exactly. It took some going back and forth to kind of articulate what, like the star of Faces of Capitalism, she actually had kind of a schizophrenic relationship with capitalism. Okay. So for her, it was actually really helpful to kind of integrate those into something that was, some kind of a synthesis. But I don't actually feel like I fully know your position on free speech. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So there's, God, I'm going to be so disappointed when I see your stuff later and I find out you're just lying and crazy. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
No, there are so many times where I have a conversation with somebody like, oh my God, they're checking so many of the right boxes. And then I'll see something like, so this is why all progressives are evil woke tards.
You will probably find things you don't agree with. And
I'm okay with things I don't agree with as long as I feel like they're considered. Like a person is, there's a considered approach. Like, I don't agree with this, but I understand where they're coming from.
And it's still a work in progress. I mean, my views have changed since the series. I mean, Faces of X, it's like the synthesis, like a good synthesis then just becomes the new thesis.
Sure.
Right? In our evolving understanding of reality. So the synthesis in those videos is just where we happen to be literally on the day we filmed. Like the script had been changing up until the second we filmed, and then that's just the snapshot in time.
Yeah.
So you will definitely find things that are less considered because I am just hopefully growing in my consideration over time.
Yeah.
I
I have strong feelings about vaccines, and if I hear somebody say something like, oh, well, I don't think I want to put anything like that on my body. If I look at a person, and if this person is like I grow my own food, I go to the gym every day, I do whatever, and I'll hear a statement like that and be like, okay, that's pretty dumb, but okay. But if I hear somebody say, like, I wouldn't put that on my body, and they weigh 350 pounds, they do recreational drugs, they smoke, I'm like, oh my God, stop. So that's just, in terms of like consistency, is this like a considered thing, like something you thought about? There's something else you said, and it's funny because you just said this is like an offhand, like a very basic question, but it's a thing that would break probably 95% of people's minds when you ask, and it's, can you give me like a negative of a thing that you're proposing? So what's a drawback? People are really bad at saying anything bad about a position that they offer. And I think also sometimes people are really bad at removing normative values from things. So like when I'm talking about economics, I usually encourage people, like our end, we should have a lot of normative value attached to the end. Like we want more people to be wealthy, we want people to be less homeless, we want people to have like, food, whatever, all of that. But the processes themselves should be looked at amorally or without ethical like attachment, right?
Yeah.
Because something might be better or worse than achieving some end, but that doesn't mean we have to feel like it's morally good to be whatever. Yeah. So getting somebody to understand, you mentioned fiduciary responsibility, right? A firm's job is to return profit to people that invest in it. That's it. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. That's just all it does. In the case of a pharmaceutical company that discovers a medication that could save people's lives and makes money selling it, that's really good in that case if they do that. In terms of a pharmaceutical company that realizes they can save a whole bunch of money by cheating the phase 3 trials, that's really bad, right? So then but the goal is to never, you can't scold somebody and say, don't do that. You have to, well, what are the incentives? It's a firm. They're trying to make a lot of money. So you have things like the NHS or the FDA who says, hey, if you want to make money, you have to play by these rules or else you're in big trouble. So that they kind of stay within that rule set. It's very hard to get people to like take away the normative value of a particular thing and just kind of analyze what it is and then consider like what are the pros and cons of like the positions that you're advocating for. Yeah.
I agree kind of like to a point. I mean, I agree in the sense that I think capitalism is a perfect example of this. It's like capitalism is a strategy for achieving a goal. Capitalism is not the goal.
Yeah.
Like, what is the goal? Like that is an excellent question. Let's talk about the goal. Like what do we want our civilization to be able to accomplish with the economic system we designed for ourselves? But in terms of like the agree to a point, there's this, I'm going to get nerdy for a second, but I think you'll actually appreciate this, this tool. I think it's
I'm generally quite jockish, but I'll...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We can be nerdy for a second, I guess. Okay. Yeah, go for it. Okay.
Okay. So this is something I learned from Daniel Goleman. He's an expert in emotional intelligence, and I think it was like this. He came out with this article. It was like 10 years ago, but so it's like every couple of years, Harvard Business Review comes out with an article that's like the top 10 qualities of a good leader, as if there's like one way to be a good leader. And what he did, which was really interesting, is he interviewed like hundreds of business leaders. And he identified 6 distinct leadership styles. You don't have to like remember them all, but it's like commanding, and then there's affiliative, and there's democratic and visionary, whatever. There's like 6 clusters of kind of like styles. And so he identifies the different circumstances in which each style works the best. So commanding is really helpful in a crisis to kickstart some kind of a turnaround. Affiliative is really helpful when people aren't getting along, to like heal rifts on a team. Visionary is really helpful when you need to go in an entirely new direction, whatever. So, but it doesn't just stop there. You could just say, oh, great. Then you could just, like, that's already a really helpful frame. It's not like which leadership style is the best,
yeah.
but under which circumstances is which leadership style the most useful. He also goes on to identify the impact that each style has on the organizational climate, right? So commanding, surprise, surprise, has a really negative impact because it feels like shit to be commanded. Affiliative has a positive impact. Like visionary has a so it's not just descriptive. It is actually also normative. It's like, it's like if I'm in a crisis, I can say to my team, like, hey team, I'm going to shift into hard ass mode for a second in order to get us out of the crisis so that I don't have to be a hard ass anymore. It's like we use the less desirable strategies to get ourselves, it's like the fossil fuels, it's like to get ourselves to a place where we don't need to use them anymore. So we can't actually say like there are some less desirable strategies. There are ones that we'd rather use less, and we only use them in order to change the circumstance so that we don't have to use them anymore. But that obviously requires what's the goal? What are our values? What do we care about? But yeah, so I would say there are not only descriptive differences. There may also be normative differences between the different strategies.
But the normativity is always goal oriented, not process oriented.
Yes. Yeah.
The free speech thing is a thing that comes up a ton, obviously, and I fight with a lot of people. So there's like in a very crude form, I guess your thesis and your antithesis is.
I'm curious.
Yeah, the thesis is that the most amount of free speech is the best thing in the world. The best ideas rise to the top. The marketplace of ideas, like we just need the most free speech possible. And then the antithesis is, I guess if you think of an internal dialogue, you need one voice so that you can move in one direction, so you can have this is the correct answer, and having a more cracked down approach on it allows you to get rid of all the bad faith actors. They can't hijack your system. You don't have all these stupid things you're wasting your time on, and everybody can more efficiently just move in the correct direction. And both of these ideas, and it is impossible to, going back to what I said before, nobody can admit the pros and cons of their side.
Right.
Both of these ideas have merit, obviously. In a kind of ironic way, it just played out in that leadership thing that you talked about. I don't know if this is true or not, because I haven't studied Greek or Roman history, but I feel like there's like 20 movies that give an example of like when Rome was being invaded, they would nominate one man to make all the decisions or whatever, right?
In a crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's that idea of like the commanding leadership style, right? There are times when freedom of speech is awesome for a bunch of direct reasons and for a bunch of indirect reasons. Indirect reasons that I'm still learning about. There's a guy, Huey Lee, who lives actually near here and does a lot of videos on styles of government and everything. And one thing that I didn't even consider when he was talking to me about the benefits of democracy versus authoritarianism is democracy actually gives you more information about what to do. In an authoritarian regime, if you're not sure, if the government isn't sure if they should move, in one direction or against it, it's hard to know what they should do because you don't actually know what the people are thinking. But in a democracy, you always know what the people think. You're constantly voting on things. Like, oh, okay, freedom of speech. And then on the other hand, you have clearly, and no one will admit this, but you have obviously bad faith actors that are leeching or abusing the freedom of speech system, because I can just like tell lies with impunity and I have freedom of speech, so it's okay. And it's very hard to reconcile. The synthesis is, I guess in my mind, when I think of synthesis, the integration is how can I get like the most pros from this part while minimizing the bads, and like the most pros from this part while minimizing the bad, and like what is the thing that I have left?
Leave the bathwater, take the baby.
As much as possible, basically.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
But if I even hear somebody's engaging in that thought process, I'm already like, okay, that's cool. I don't even care what your answer is. Like the fact that you've been thinking about it in this frame, I'm already like super happy. Like, you don't have this like this deontological obsession with just like one thing, like freedom of speech is like nothing is ever, it doesn't matter. There's nothing. It's like, okay, dude.
Well, and okay, so let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do Faces of Free Speech. Cool.
Sure.
Great.
If you want to, yeah.
Yeah. I will say though, now that we've I think it is probably worth acknowledging that like anything, synthesis can be weaponized, right? If I want to convince you of something that's center left, I make the center the thesis, the left the antithesis, and then presto, I've so.
Actually, I will ask you one more question then.
How can it be weaponized? Or
so when you're engaging in, when you're integrating ideas,
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll hear somebody say, this is my belief. This is my axiomatic ethical belief on this particular thing. And then sometimes when they're given a thing to consider, I'll notice that in having like two things, they're deciding between one or the other. And sometimes I try to make people understand when you're saying that you believe that, let's say that you believe that like freedom of speech is always good. Okay, freedom of speech is always good. And then we'll take like a radical example, child sexual assault material or whatever, right? Obviously you don't think this is okay, right? And I was like, no, okay. And I try to make people understand that like, okay, well, you have a clear conflict here.
Yeah.
You're appealing to something else. There's something else that's working more foundational than this. Your freedom of speech is a second or third order belief. There's something underneath, because when I ask you about a thing, you don't stop at freedom of speech. You're considering something else, and we have to find out what that something else is. When you're doing integration into synthesis, when you're doing this, how do you get people to understand what they're aiming towards? Because to even consider two ideas, you must be comparing them to some kind of internal system of belief or something.
Yeah.
How do you get people to consider that or become aware of that, I guess?
Like what is the foundation?
Yeah, I guess like for the climate change example that we brought up earlier, right? You've got human flourishing on the long term, human flourishing on the short term, different types of human flourishing. How do you get somebody, because sometimes people could have a clash of a foundational belief and they can synthesize all day, but they're never going to agree on a particular thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the deepest question, actually, is like, where is because then how does it not all just like become relative? Like we're just like, and I guess I can say, like some perspectives are inherently unintegratable. We can just say like abortion never and abortion always do not play well with anything else. So that is just an inherently unintegratable position. I just know by virtue of the fact that you're unintegratable that I cannot include you in this process. So that's, and then, there are other perspectives that we can just say, and how can you say, that are just morally unwelcome. Like a meaningful synthesis on race is not between anti-racism and racism, right? It's between, let's say, like the anti-racism of Ibram X. Kendi and the color blindness of Coleman Hughes, something like that, right? So we can like, and how do you know that you're not, how do you know which ones to, I mean, we have to be discerning about which perspectives we integrate and how we frame the sides of the debate. And like the how do we know question, how do we know that we're not weaponizing synthesis in order to convince ourselves of something we want to believe, or that we're not just like completely going off the rails and including whatever, I don't remember what you just, slavery. I mean, there's no foolproof way is the answer. It's like maintain epistemic humility, like keep in mind that like the map, no matter how detailed, is not the territory. So like whatever you need to do, whatever like contemplative practice keeps you tethered to the like infinity of reality that you will never fully understand, like keep doing that, whatever that is, meditation, prayer, and I was raised Jewish. In Judaism, we have Shabbat, and I think part of the idea is that you spend 6 days a week like focused on the map, and like 1 day a week just like marveling at the infinity you will never understand. So like whatever keeps you humble in that way, I like keep doing that.
Okay. All right. Interesting. It's funny that you brought up abortion, because there's the two topics that I don't debate on stream, I just don't enjoy doing anymore, are abortion and veganism. Because I feel like both of them are foundationally they're rooted in things that I would say are like outside of any fact determinative, humanly knowable thing. Because for abortion, people argue about it a lot of different ways, but I think like foundationally abortion is asking the question of like, when do you become a human life worth?
Why do you need to know the answer? Aren't you still like choosing between like two, like you could just say like, which is the least bad option?
Because I think because I think you start to hit binaries, depending upon where you're rooted at outside of what I can like factually argue. So for instance,
but why do you need to know the answer to that question?
Because if you believe, for instance, that a life begins at the very moment of conception, there's basically nothing save like the life of the mother is in danger. There's basically,
why?
Because any other argument puts you into horrible territory. You're saying like sometimes you can kill babies.
But it's like the trolley problem. It's like you're just choosing the least bad option.
Yeah, but it would be like the trolley problem, where on one side there's a person on the train tracks, and on the other side you have to like spend 5 minutes like doing a piece of homework. It's so because the translation is like, in what circumstances is it okay to kill a 6-month-old baby? And if the answer is like basically never, right?
A 6-month-old baby, is a different proposition.
Yeah, but why? But I feel like if you truly believe that at the moment of conception, it's a human baby endowed with all the same rights as like an ordinary baby.
Yeah, no, I think I totally understand what you're saying. I guess the way I think about it is that you can absolutely concede that a fetus is a human being at its earliest stages of development, and it is in a process of development. It is in a process. So over time, the moral calculus of abortion changes over the course of a pregnancy, and there is a difference between where you are in that process, including whether you're right, whether your viability is a moving target. So that's its own. But like, you have to acknowledge that it's not like a switch is turned on and now it's just on.
I feel like most people view it. I think I would actually view it.
As a switch is turned on.
I think so, because I think that if I look towards the end of life, I don't think I'm ever like graduating or degraduating. Like as this person gets older, they're becoming less morally valuable. Like it feels like it's a threshold question.
But I guess what I'm saying is I don't think you need to know the answer to that question in order to ask yourself what is the least bad option in this circumstance, because you're just choosing between two shitty options, kind of, or maybe, or you're choosing between like what is just the path of least suffering. And I think that like a majority, the largest ideological diversity of people, let's say, could get on board with like, under some circumstances, abortion is the path of is the least bad option.
Yeah, I agree that.
And then you don't even have to answer the life at conception question.
I think on a policy level, I think that works, because you're basically aggregating a bunch of beliefs into like a thing that most people are kind of okay with. But in terms of like the philosophical argument, where you don't necessarily need to have the same level of consensus you would for like a legal argument, because we all have to kind of agree on.
Yeah, you're right. And then great. But then we can like do the policy thing there, and then in the philosophical domain, we can just let that still be like super complicated.
Possibly. But I mean, I would say that one of Alito's, one of Alito's arguments in that ruling for Dobbs was that despite Casey and Roe, and it was true, we really haven't come much closer to a consensus opinion on abortion. Like it feels like gay marriage was a Supreme Court thing, and in 15 years you're like, we have gay marriage, it's fine. Everybody's like more or less like okay with it, but abortion is still like a major,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg had misgivings about Roe because she didn't think it should be the Supreme Court's decision. And I actually do think that Roe like really polarized us. It moved us further into our corners, such that I think enacting it like democratically is actually much more resilient politically and culturally, because it actually polarized us further. And then both sides got like more extreme. Like one side is like shouting their abortion, and the other side is like, saying like under no circumstances like abortion is, it got us, it pushed us into our corners.
I think I kind of agree. Yeah, I fight sometimes against the doing things democratically is better because it creates consensus, because I feel like it's a bit begging the question, because it's like, well, obviously if we can democratically do it where there's already some consensus
and
there.
But the people who are historically fucked are like still continue to be fucked.
Potentially, But
so
okay,
it's going to take longer. It's going to take longer, but I do think, and then of course that begs the question, like, are all states letting it be enacted democratically, which is its own question. But in ideal circumstances, it is more resilient. It is a more resilient
for sure
strategy.
Yeah. But anyway, abortion and veganism, we don't do this. You feel the same.
Okay, you don't do each. It's funny. People have asked me to do I don't know if I would call it faces of meat. Haha. I don't think I would call it faces of meat. I don't know what I would call it, but why it's a similar.
Because it's like, what is moral consideration? When does something grant moral consideration?
I feel the same way about that one. I feel like you kind of zoom out and look at you compare option, like maybe that's a more pragmatic approach. And that it's like, we don't all need to agree on whether life begins or whether you were going to say.
I think I agree with you. Maybe I'm thinking of different types of arguments. Like I'll have an abortion legal or policy debate. Yeah. And I think I don't think I've ever had one before, but I would have like a veganism policy debate. Yeah. But the philosophical debate on that level is just like, it's way, way, way harder.
Yeah, which I think is actually good. Like I think is great how kind of complex it is when you drill down into it. Like it's a good thing to reckon with. It's like meat is so available, right? In our like food system. So reckoning with the actual, like the philosophical complexity of that one, I think is probably on some level good for us.
Yeah, to some extent. I do agree with that. Yeah. I'm not a vegan at all, but
I was actually, I was for a period of time. And,
I mean, you were an activist helping people living in trees.
Exactly.
So you must have been in California. You must have been. Yeah.
Exactly. So I went through that phase, and it's funny. What the realization that I had was that the difference I was interested in was not the difference between a plant and an animal. It was the difference between a certain kind of production system or another kind of, it's like we can raise and kill animals humanely, and we can treat plants like shit. So it's that was not the difference that I was actually interested. Like I realized that the impact I wanted to have on the world was not the impact. It was like I had that reckoning, right, with the gap, and I remember the first time I ate meat after being a vegan for years. I was at a wedding, and they served lobster. Ugh. And lobster it's not a kind of meat you can just kind of like you have to get into the anatomy of that animal in order to eat it. Like there's no escaping it. And I was actually just kind of like marveling at it, because it's like I don't know. It's like, it's got this whole complicated anatomy, and you have to like open things up to find the meat. And I was sitting with someone who, she was like, did you know that they have to like, they boil them alive, and like what they do. And I had just been a vegan, so I was like, I kind of know. I was like, well, yeah, it's like in order to kill something, it has to be alive before you kill it. That's kind of the definition of whatever. I was just like, I'm not even going to go into this with you. But she was kind of like talking to me about like all this stuff about that, and there I was actually like marveling at the lobster, and I was just like, who is loving the lobster more right now, you or me? I was like, I am loving this thing. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So but for that one, perverse incentives is a major kind of factor, because
we're highly incentivized to argue.
That drives our whole kind of like, foods like agricultural subsidies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So okay. The only thing for the vegans that the veganism argument stuff that kind of irritates me is it's similar a lot to the vaccine stuff, where if I see an anti-vaxxer, it's like, if you live your whole life in some crazy naturalist way, like fine, I get it. Every time, the thing that irritates me the most, which is funny because I'm a meat eater, but like when I see other meat eating people who get so mad at like animal abuse incidences or whatever, where like a lion will get killed or a gorilla will get killed or somebody's dog will get abused or whatever, and I'll be like, I kind of get it on an emotional level, but you must understand how morally bankrupt your...
Yeah, have you ever seen a factory farm?
Yeah, I'm like, come on, dude. Yeah. So there'll be a dog or a cat that gets abused, and I'll tweet out something like, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, like while eating my cheeseburger and chicken, and everybody, all the meat eater people get so mad. They're like, it's not even close to the same thing, man. And it's like, yeah.
It's funny you put those together too, though, because that's a thing that is kind of set. It's like people who are anti-abortion but eat meat. It's like, are you... How far do you extend this idea of being, like appreciating the sanctity of life?
Sure. You have a zygote, a single cell just created, and that thing is endowed with all the protections of a human, but then like a cow or a pig, that's freedom of speech. Okay.
Freedom of speech. So we'll do freedom of speech.
Sure.
The debate project is the idea is that, in order to have a thriving democracy, we need a thriving debate of ideas, and yet here we are. And
therefore here we are. What do you mean?
And
here we are.
Therefore here we are. Look at the conversations, everything that you're struggling with online. Oh. So, but in a traditional debate, only one perspective can win, right? Which can sometimes incentivize straw manning, right? It behooves me to make your position sound weaker so that my position can sound stronger. Right now, the placeholder name for this project, you're going to have to forgive me, is anti-debate. I'm totally not anti-debate at all. And the name is going to change, but that's just the name I'm going to use for now. So the idea with an anti-debate, which placeholder name, is that the person who wins is the person who best integrates the other person's perspective into their own position, which would then incentivize steel manning, right? Because I'm going to have to really be listening to you in good faith in order to
like matter and antimatter, not like antimatter isn't like I hate matter or whatever. It's
but I am probably still going to change the name anyway to like dialectic debate or integrate debate. I don't know what it's going to be. Create debate. But I'm designing the format now, and I can tell you a little bit about where it's at, but I will need to test it out. Okay. So when I get there, would you want to moderate one, or would you want to participate in one?
Honestly, I enjoy both.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoy either one. So whatever you need, I guess.
I think it will be so cool to watch. And that's the thing. It's like, how do you deal with these people who like don't? It's like you lose points. Well, first of all, do you agree to the terms? If not, you don't get to participate. And if you do, and you're doing all these, you're engaging in bad faith, you're just gonna lose. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, like, wouldn't it be amazing to walk away from a debate with a better understanding, all of us, of the issue being debated about? That would be great. So let's go for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Oh wait, I didn't know if you wanted to talk through any of that now, but if you want to do that.
We could. Yeah. I mean, I have. So, it'll start with some kind of covenant. It's like, what are the people agreeing to? And then, I don't have, I can kind of like summarize. So, you have the first person does their opening statement. Then the second person has to steel man the first person's opening statement to their satisfaction, right? And go back and forth. And if you find a word that's kind of being weaponized, like you said, like either you agree to the definition, or if you can't, you just agree to stop using that word for the rest of the anti-debate. And
that's
then
somebody emailed me. I'm like so I know some philosophy terms, and I've like looked into a few things a little bit, but in terms of like reading full like philosophical texts, absolutely not. So I know like enough vocabulary to just abuse the hell out of it and have anybody that knows what they're talking about, hate me for it. So just as a forewarning, sorry if I ever talk about it. And a lot of things I just like very briefly pick up because people email me concepts or ideas or whatever.
Okay.
Prefacing all of this so that if I misquote something or write something completely wrong, feel free to correct me. But I had a fan who emailed me a blurb of Wittgenstein. Yeah. And it I don't know if he actually believes or said this, but it radically changed a lot of my approach to philosophy and debate and politics in general, which was the idea that I think he said that, I don't know if it was in the first half or the later half of Wittgenstein's life, that he basically believed that all problems of philosophy were illusory, and it's really all just matters of language misunderstanding. And that if a philosophical question seemed very complicated or very like deep or difficult to solve, what's probably happening is there's a language problem, and once the language problem and the syntax is figured out, the semantic understanding follows like very naturally. And there's a lot of debates or conversations now where I'm like, okay, hold on, we're having, this is a big semantics thing right now, which I hate that has such a negative connotation, because semantics are arguably the most important thing, because language is like one of the most, maybe the most important thing we have as humans. But I find for a lot of people that sometimes the debate is a matter of like, can we semantically be on the same page, or syntactically be on the same page, where we're using like the correct, not correct, that was a really bad word. That would have triggered somebody. We're using a shared definition of what we're saying. And once you start to iron out a lot of the differences of how we're using the words, I was going to say discongruence.
Sure.
Sometimes I just add
That
things.
works.
No, it doesn't work. The incongruence of the positions will slowly disappear as you kind of like bring your language into alignment. So something that seems as kind of like trite or trivial as like, oh, okay, well, let's just make sure we're using the same words, that a lot of the times when you're arguing with people, just getting on the same page of that. The abortion one, I think, is a good example to where usually when people come at this, one person is arguing kind of like bodily autonomy, women's rights, and then the other person might be arguing that abortion is bad. And it's like, okay, we need to talk about like is the fetus a human? Because that's really the only thing that matters here. And if you guys could just kind of like move in that direction by collapsing your language or understanding what you're saying, like you'd be having a more substantive conversation, I guess.
Yeah. And you've done that and it's helped you
sometimes
online?
It does. Yeah. But or at the very least, if it doesn't resolve it, at least it gets us to a more meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
So somebody will say something like Trump weaponized the DOJ or Biden weaponized the DOJ. And I'm like, okay, hold on. So my gut is to fight on this is, I think in one of these is very true and one of these is not true. But then it's more like, hold on. Because I could have a 2-hour debate on that, and at the end I'd be like, wait a second. When you say weaponize the DOJ, what do you mean by that? And they'll be like, oh, well, they press charges against like a political opponent. It's like, okay, hold on. Do you think that that's weaponizing? And then I realized, like, fuck, why did we just have this whole conversation? What do you think weaponize? Yeah. And that'd be an example of like, let's actually, what do we mean when we even say this? And then if you resolve that, they're like, oh, okay, well, if that's the case, then I agree with all that, or I disagree with all that. Like, we didn't need to waste our time talking about that.
Yeah. So a question. So we were talking a little bit before we started, like, do you think that someone like Ben Shapiro would agree to participate in something like a renamed anti-debate? Why or why not? My mind immediately left the orbit of anything having to do with this, and it's now a whole bunch of macro layers on top of it that have nothing to do with... let's go through the macro layers.
Yeah. I'm just explaining my thought process.
Those might be the perverse incentives. Partially.
So I think the answer would be, given that there's like an appropriate like publicity that he's obviously, Let's say it was hosted on Lex Fridman or somewhere like the answer would be absolutely yes.
He would?
I think so, yeah. But for the worst reasons. One of the things that I am very frustrated in right now when it comes to political discourse is that there's an aesthetic of a thing, and people have abandoned the function of the thing because the aesthetic is so sexy and favorable.
It's like nuance signaling or whatever, something like that. Yeah.
I tell my audience this, and I tell people this, that like when you come to my stream and I describe myself, like every single thing I say should be a massive red flag to you, because if I ever hear people say anything, it's like, oh, like for me personally, like I do my own research. I think that you should have a considered position between like multiple points of view. I think that I don't belong cleanly to any political party. Like all of these things are, when I hear somebody say this, like, you're absolutely fucking full of shit. You're hard. If somebody says like, for instance, like, oh, I'm nonpartisan. You're a conservative. You just don't want to admit it. Every single time. Or somebody's like, I do my own research. Okay. That means that you've listened to Joe Rogan's opinion on it and one other podcast. You've never read a paper. You've never read anything in your entire life. So like a lot of things I say are like red flags, and it bothers me because the aesthetic of these things has become so attractive. Yeah. So when I think of would somebody like Ben Shapiro do a show like that, I think so, because I think it gives the aesthetic of, well, look, I'm so carefully considered in my positions that I would even do like a philosophy exercise on this particular thing to show how considered I am on these positions. Yeah. I think it would be interesting to hear him do a thing like that, but the topic is like trans drugs for 14-year-olds. That would be really interesting. Can you actually steel man the argument on that? Or some position where it's like, I want to hear you say a single positive thing about this. Even if you don't agree at the end, maybe the synthesis is, 18 and older is only the,
Yeah. And that is one way that it could end, is that we've just clarified the disagreement.
Possibly, yeah. But at least,
which is also helpful.
Because I've noticed also when it comes to people engage almost intuitively in a way with the concept of synthesis, and that there will be a thesis of a thing they believe in, an antithesis, and then they'll not artificially, there's a word I'm looking for, not aesthetically, they'll go through that superficially, performatively, superficially. They'll go through that process, but not really. And the way that I identify this is sometimes people will, when they're doing the thesis, I don't use the word thesis or antithesis because I don't read German, fuck Hegelian and everything. But like somebody will, the thesis part will be, why is freedom of speech will say. Why is it so important? Freedom of speech is really important because everybody in society needs a voice.
Yeah.
You can't have one authoritarian body dictating who's right or wrong. We need to be considering different points of view. Liberal democratic society only works when we can have differing points of view in society, right? And then the antithesis will be, okay, well, what does the other side say? They want to be a nanny police state.
Yeah.
And
that's a strong, they're doing a strong man.
Maybe, yeah. Or it's not even a strong man, but it'll be like, I'll call it like the outer perimeter of like the weakest. It'll be like when a person says,
steel man
I'm attacking conservatives right now a lot. Usually I do both sides to give an example, but I don't want that buy right now. I hate conservatives. But like, it'll be for Donald Trump, right? I'll hear somebody's like, oh, I don't support Trump on everything. And I'll be like, okay, tell me what you don't support him on. And it'll always be like, I think he can be mean sometimes on Twitter. What do you support him on? I think his position on Ukraine is correct. I like his domestic policy. I like his approach to taxation. I think and it's like, okay. So the things you disagree on are irrelevant. And the things you agree on are all the core ideas. You're like, the disagreements are like the outer perimeter.
Yeah.
So that's like a thing sometimes that'll happen with this. Yeah, is people, the antithesis will be the weakest, most outer perimeter things that nobody cares about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he'll lose points. He won't win.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's I guess it just goes back to the like anything can be weaponized. It's like, but I guess if we're at the point where we're weaponizing synthesis, like, can I say that we're moving in the right direction? Like, if this becomes the thing that people are wanting to perform, if they're doing, if they're performing nuance, even if they're not as nuanced as they claim that they, I mean, if nuance has, cachet.
I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think I would actually disagree. I think if people were doing it, I think then that would be good, even if they were doing it poorly. The aesthetic as a substitution for the function of a thing, I think is actually incredibly annoying and damaging, and that I would actually prefer, like, I would much rather go into a room and fight with 10 hardcore conservative or Nazis.
Right, that are super honest about...
Yeah, rather than the hardest thing is when I have to fight with one super conservative and 9 centrists who, because now my position is I look insane. I'm so far to the left because not only the conservatives agree, all the centrists disagree with me, and I'm like, well, fuck, I look crazy now. As opposed to like, if you were just 9 conservatives, then at the very least we would both be occupying opposite spaces.
Yeah.
But the sometimes that aesthetic of considered difference in the middle makes certain positions look way more extreme or radical than I think they actually are. Yeah.
I mean, well, maybe now going back to the beginning, I don't consider myself a radical centrist.
That's good. Okay.
I used to call myself a promiscuous pragmatic pluralist.
Okay.
Until I discovered integral. Are you familiar with integral theory? That's a whole nother rabbit hole.
I remember integrals from Calc BC, but I don't know what it's...
No, anyway, integral, I was like, one word instead of 3, so much easier, so much less of a mouthful. But I don't, for me, it's like, sure, I guess I'm a centrist on the issues that maybe I'm in the center on, but it's just on those. It's like it's not 2-dimensional, it's 3-dimensional. So so it's like somewhere in your notes, I think I read that because you changed your views, that sometimes gets weaponized against you, of the I don't know exactly what people would say.
They'll call you a flip-flop or something.
Right. And so, but that's assuming that it's a 2-dimensional spectrum, right? That's assuming that you've just gone 180 degrees in the opposite direction. But doing baby bathwater is a vertical direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you can kind of diffuse the kinds of change I was interested with Reckonings, the podcast, weren't changes from right to left or left to right. It was from certainty to uncertainty. Right? It was from dogma to ideological liberty. It was from being fearfully attached to my views to having the freedom to reflect on them and be critical of them and change them in order to adapt to the reality around me. So once you include that, I think that can help diffuse this like weaponization of flip-flopping or whatever, is to be able to point to like, no, actually I kept the baby. And not only did I keep the baby, lose the bathwater and end up with a bigger picture, but I now hold my views in a different way. I'm able to like hold them tightly and loosely by choice.
Yeah.
Like there are some that I still hold tightly, my husband has a very, I would say, like a tight relationship with his Jewish spirituality. It's like the 10 Commandments, I didn't choose them. That's not like I get to just like pick it. It's like they were given to me. I am commanded to do these things. But I appreciate especially in an era of like getting to choose your everything. Like there are some things I'm just not going to choose.
Yeah.
There are some things I'm just going to hold lightly, although that is like kind of a choice, but it's a choice I'm almost like giving away to have. And then there are some things I'm going to hold loosely. And that I think you can like point back to the people who are weaponizing your change against you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And acknowledge that there's a bigger capacity that you've inhabited.
Hopefully. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's, I guess 3 things on this. The first thing is, when you mentioned the getting people to make these like big vertical changes, I guess, and how that's like a negative thing. It always is like, it raises my eyebrows when somebody's like, when I was younger, I was so dumb. I used to be like a hardcore, like communist socialist. And I realized how dumb that was. So that's why now I'm a hardcore anarchist libertarian or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's cool. It's interesting. You swapped out one extremist anti whatever belief for another, but okay.
It'll take like one more 180 degrees until
you'll get there eventually. One thing that I also noticed too, and it's very funny because I'll watch this happen in live conversations, is something that I've said before. This is so hard to do in content creation spaces, and I think it's probably hard to do for humans in general. But there's levels of maturity that hopefully every human moves through, where when it comes to dealing with feedback as a public figure, it's very difficult because there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. And obviously the human, the base, like level 0 is like, I'm ignoring all of it, screw these people, okay? And then the next level is like kind of taking way too much feedback to heart, where you're like, oh my God, like everybody hates me on this thing and I don't think I was that bad or whatever. And then ideally there's this version where you look at things that people are saying and you understand that even though it might not be correct, there's something happening there that's like worth paying attention to. And it's very hard sometimes to get people to understand that like I don't believe, like people can be irrational, I think sometimes, but people are never random. Just because somebody's being irrational doesn't mean that their behavior is they're flipping a coin and everything. There's a reason why they're doing a particular thing. Oftentimes it's really predictable. So getting people to look at a whole bunch of feedback and say, okay, a bunch of people are saying something negative here, but why? Like there must be something that this is like a proxy for. And and it's funny because I remember I was having a debate one time with a guy, and it had to do with, not to open the whole housing thing. I'm a very wealthy person. I rent, okay? I don't want to buy a house. I just don't need to. And the idea that like buying a house is just clearly superior in every single way to renting is just stupid. It's become a political belief, but financially, that's just not the case, that buying a house is always the best financial decision. And there are pros and cons to buying, and there are pros and cons to renting. And just because of morally how people feel about the economy or capitalism or landlords or whatever, there are like very negative connotations with landlords, very positive connotations with buying a home. And I was arguing with a guy about this once on my stream, and I was bringing up, and he's like, why would you ever, like, whatever. And one of the things I said was, well, the liability for an apartment is very nice because the worst thing that can happen with an apartment is you get kicked out. The worst thing that happens with a house is you're upside down on a mortgage, you have a huge liability, you have to file bankruptcy. And even my chat, because my chat is a bit to the left of me on this issue, everybody's like, oh, Destiny, you're out of touch, you don't understand, like this is like this doesn't happen, blah, blah, blah. And I think probably 20 or 30 minutes into this debate with the guy, like I end up, because I've picked up a lot of new audience members over the last couple of years, so they don't know as much of my history, but my parents, for a variety of reasons, ended up quitting their work when I was like 12 or 13, and they had to file bankruptcy. We got foreclosed out of our home, and that was a whole ordeal.
Oh, wow.
And as soon as I said this, rather than the chat being like, oh, okay, maybe he has his perspective or whatever, it all changed to, oh, you're too emotionally bought into this, or oh, you're like too, and I'm like, okay, yeah. So sometimes people will get to all this to say that sometimes people will accuse you of having a particular bias, but then that's a proxy for, I disagree with your opinion, but I don't want to say that. I'm going to find a reason to say that. And if you change the reason, they don't change their opinion. They find a new reason to hop to maintain the opinion. That's just very funny to me. And you can see that play in a lot of ways, where somebody like disagrees with a thing and they're like, oh, it's because of that. And then you find out it's the opposite. It's like, well, of course, whatever. It's because,
People also, I find that they find it like almost disappointing or something, that sometimes it'll take personal experience to change your mind. But it's like, did it really have to take like your daughter being gay way or something to change your, but for me, it's like, God, thank God that through personal experience. I mean, imagine if we all had to like read, I mean, we should read all but like, thank God that personal experience can change us, because that's something that we're having all of the time.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, that's not like it's like, please allow my life and the experiences I have in my life to inform my understanding of reality. Thank you. I'm curious about your goals. You were saying like I guess your goals for your channel or your goals for this show and what has been challenging.
Oh, yeah. Oh, because you talked about that a little before.
Yeah.
One other quick thing I was going to say about something you said before is I don't think that being right or wrong is the most important thing. I think matching your convictions, I think, are really important too. So I would rather somebody has an appropriate level of convictions for everything they believe rather than they're generally right or not wrong that often. Hearing somebody say like, I actually think that I think that this policy is a good one, but I don't really know that much about it. So like, you know, whatever. Yeah.
That's actually another question to add to yours, like, what is your percentage of certainty?
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, oh, actually, like, pretty low, you know, or I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah.
Which is good because if somebody, but then if it's an influencer or content creator, then do you present it that way?
What is your percent? I would totally ask that question. It's like, first it's like, what do you believe about this, or what is your take on this? And then what is your percentage of certainty about that?
Or not percentage, presentation. How do you present it this way? So like if I ask somebody, like if I force somebody to consider that, how confident are you? And they're like, maybe like 20%. I'm like, okay, well, so here's a clip of you saying like, rah, 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 rah. It's like, that doesn't sound like a 20% take.
That's actually one of the last things at the end of the anti-debate is like, how, based on your experience today, like how will you move forward in some kind of like different way based on how you're going to talk about this issue or how you're going to act on this issue. So, yeah. But what are your goals?
So originally my goal for Bridges was to, I wanted to bring on people with substantively different views.
From yours or from each other's?
From mine.
From yours,
And then we could kind of hash it out. That sounds more violent than I
No.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like what the anti-debate is designed to help you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the unfortunate discoveries that I made, for most people are familiar with my background. I'm very hardcore, or most people in my audience, are familiar with my background. You know, I was a very hardcore debater, roll around in the mud, 2016 to 2019. I was like, okay, well, let's like tone it down a little bit, be a little bit more empathetic, and you know, different environments call for different rhetorical styles, and they get different types of fans, and they're good, whatever. But one of the things that and it's always this balance of like, broadly speaking, we call it responsible platforming or whatever. Yeah. But it's always this balance of like, I want to talk to you and I want to challenge your views, but I need to do it in a way that you're open to it. Yeah. So it's probably can't be me screaming at you the whole time. And I want it to be somewhat productive. Yeah. And I'm open to being wrong on things as possible. And I think probably at the largest reach I've had, I think it was probably towards the beginning of this year, where I spoke to a lot of Daily Wire people. Basically, I think it was like Ben Shapiro, it was Jordan Peterson, it was Candace Owens, it was Michael Knowles. And I had come away, I guess, happy initially because I'm like, okay, well, I'm having more of these conversations. I wish we could have kind of, you know, dove into some more things here, whatever. And then at the midpoint of this year, the Trump assassination attempt or whatever thing happened. And then I saw all of the discourse unfolding on this. And I think I was just like, I hate my life right now because without diving too much into that thing, or we can dive into it, I don't care. I noticed that it was the first time that I'd like clearly observed that conservatives control the entire media landscape, because this idea that liberals had to like kneel and beg for forgiveness, that like this horrible thing happened. And I'm like, okay, hold on, wait a second. You guys have been engaged in the insane fucking rhetoric for like 4 years. Why the fuck is this our fault? Are you serious? And I'd made some, I'll say, pretty extreme statements to that effect. Okay. I absolutely had. And I had made extreme statements, and I stand by all those statements, and I'll continue to do so when people ask me about them. But I noticed that after that happened, now all the conservatives are like, oh no, like Destiny is, he's like unhinged. Like there's no way that I can talk to this person.
Okay.
And as I go back and I analyze the conversations we had before, and I analyze like the conversations I want to have now, I think actually the main thing that changed, because they have a lot of unhinged people in their programs, I think that the thing that was happening before that was just not as perceptible to me, although it was the thing I worried about, was if I believe in a thing, but I can bring on a guy who is completely opposite to me, but he promises to like neuter himself enough such that I can say that I had the conversation at least. It validates my position a lot. And I don't want to play that part ever. And it kills me that I had a conversation with Shapiro where it was like with kids clubs the whole time, or with Candace Owens or Jeremy.
There was no one moderating. It was just an open conversation between you two.
Well, there was a moderator for Ben Shapiro, but it was Lex Friedman. So it was like intentionally like a very light
it was on his show.
Yeah. And that should have been a far more brutal conversation, because I just think a lot of what he said was completely unacceptable.
But Lex is not going to do that.
Yeah. And and then same thing with Jordan Peterson. That one wasn't moderated, and I provided a bit of pushback, but like it was a pretty gentle conversation, all considering like the things that he'd said. But then I noticed afterwards that even after being so gentle, that like sometimes, like Jordan Peterson afterwards saying like, oh, I think Destiny's is a guy who wants to be right all the time or whatever. And that was for my standards, a very gentle conversation, given how absolutely fucking absurd and uneducated a lot of things that this man who supposedly and purportedly an educated man is saying. So basically all that to say that now I'm like, okay, well, it feels like people want to have challenging conversations insofar as they can have the aesthetic of a challenging conversation. I brought on Destiny and he disagrees with me when we spoke, but we didn't really hash out any of these. So then that, I guess all to say that for the Bridges show or whatever. So now I'm curious, like, I don't know if anybody would come on. It's like, I want you to come on and I really want to dive into this issue, because I think that's frustrating to me.
Well, I mean, hopefully, I think the anti-debate is like precisely designed to help with this, because it gives you a structure. Then we don't have to like worry about like, do we have to use kid gloves, or are we getting into it, or are we not getting into it? It's like someone, you know exactly the format and you agree to it in advance, and then someone is going to moderate it. And it probably, if it involves like any of these guys, you shouldn't be moderating it. You should be in an anti-debate with them.
Sure.
But the moderator is going to be a hard role to fill, because it's got to be someone who, can like abide by this structure, and also who has some domain expertise. So they can kind of like, which is pretty standard, I guess, for a debate anyway. But that is exactly what this kind of format would help alleviate, because there should be like productive and fruitful dialogue between these different perspectives on the internet. It shouldn't be the case that like they're not talking at all, and it should also not be the case that like when they talk they have kid gloves on and they don't really get into it, or they just fight and nothing really super productive happens. It's like we should all walk away having learned something, and hopefully learned like who is actually better at doing this kind of like synthesis integration thing, and who is just not. I mean, you're like weak steel man is not going to get you very far in this context.
One of the reasons why, and there's a whole other conversation we had about like the media environment that we inhabit and how people relate to that and relate to the real world. But one of the nice things about democracy or freedom of speech or whatever is that this dialectic can happen naturally without anybody actually doing it, because your thesis and your antithesis are just both sides fighting with each other, and then the integration is just the tension between the two, and then the synthesis is whatever ends up like codified in law or wherever you end up heading. But if these two things become totally separated, and then you cut the corpus, whatever that middle part of your brain is, you cut it off. Then it's like you have no more of that, and it just like devolves.
Totally, it's like schizophrenia or whatever would happen if you didn't have that. The way that, from what I understand, the way that our consciousness has evolved. I mean, there is like generally conceptually a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then the synthesis becomes the new thesis, and you keep on. But the biggest leap that that I think we are ready for is this leap from because is the leap from my way is right, all the other ways are wrong, to this like under what circumstances is which way helpful, even though I like some ways are more fair or beautiful or just than others. That is because even with the thesis antithesis, there has been it's like every time we make some kind of like civilizational, or we go from monarchy to democracy, whatever, we do the like previous way bad, current way right, and that is kind of like the next leap that we are due for, is the wait a second, wow, like look at how many ways we've given birth to. Look at this cornucopia of ways of thinking and being and doing all different kinds of things. And thank God we've given birth to so many ways. And some of them we can just leave off the table forever, like slavery. But for the most part, like most of them are useful in some circumstances. So we can kind of like, we can like cease doing the previous way wrong, current way right thing, and like just appreciate the cornucopia.
Yeah, the shades of gray thing is very hard, or the pros and cons thing is very hard, almost inhuman. It requires an almost inhuman amount of consideration, I guess. There's an interesting essay by the Isaac Asimov guy, science fiction writer, who he has an essay over like flat Earth, basically, and it's this concept that a person that believes in flat Earth has actually made a fairly intelligent generalization in that the entire Earth, like the surface, must be on the aggregate uniform, which is smart. It means you don't believe that it, like, there's just random holes and hills like that.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense in the aggregate, right? And that there's a very, 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 very slight curvature. I don't know what the degrees is of the Earth to like make it a sphere, but it's a very small change from flat Earth to spherical Earth. But that flat Earth is a good generalization from believing in randomness, that a spherical Earth is a good generalization from a flat Earth, and that your actual sphere is like an oblate spheroid or something because you bulge in the center because of angular momentum or something. That's like the best one, but that it's not fair sometimes to say that, you know, a flat earther, well, nowadays it is. But like back then, to say like, oh, flat earther isn't entirely wrong, and a spherical Earth is not entirely wrong, and that all of these like incremental improvements are important to realize.
And that's why I don't usually speak or I try not in terms of changing mind, but expanding mind, because you can take their partial truth and give them a bigger picture that still includes their perception that when I look around, the Earth looks flat. Similarly, I mean, you could, and I think to the extent that you do that, that will like something like QAnon. It's like, yeah, there is a global elite with too much power. It's not a satanic cabal of shape-shifting lizards, but like you do have a partial truth there that is really worth including. Something
that's very difficult, and I don't know if you would get this intuitively from a stats background, but there are so many things in terms of numbers and like doing like correlations and R squareds and like graphs and everything, where it's like, you sound like I sound insane as soon as I start talking about this to a conservative, but like just because something is factually correct, like you have a factually correct statement that has sometimes no bearing on whether or not your conclusion is factually correct or not. That is very hard sometimes to make people understand that the idea of drawing a conclusion from a set of facts is a whole skill in and of itself, and that just presenting a couple facts doesn't really mean your conclusion is valid or not, that there's like a whole process there of integrating information and creating something that's like, you know, like a true conclusion. And yeah, sometimes it's very difficult to argue with people who have like one or two facts, and it's like, well, just because that's the case doesn't necessarily mean
that the conclusion holds.
And sometimes sometimes there's even simple questions like you can ask somebody, like the debt, the U.S. debt is a big one. And it's surprising too, because even the last conversation I had was a guy who's a big business guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of Quest cookies. Or protein stuff, but he made this whole business, like a tremendous business, really smart guy, but he's like fully bought into, as a lot of the Silicon Valley types now are, I don't know.
That you like don't need to eat food or something.
Oh, no, it's not that. It was the whole like libertarian, like gold standard, like abolish the Federal Reserve, all of this type of stuff. And the U.S. debt is like the most evil thing in the world. And I remember I asked him a question. I was like, what do you think the U.S. debt should be ideally? And then he stopped to think about it, and he'd never considered it before. And then he was like, I guess ideally it would be zero. And that was a very interesting answer to me. And then I pushed him along. I was like, because you're a business guy. And if you had a business that was like growing and expanding, and you saw that they had absolutely no debt, you would say, what are you doing? What leverage? What, you can borrow money cheaply, expand your business. You're going to make more than the interest on this. Obviously, like a business with no debt is either failing or something is broken or not right there. So it's interesting that he gave that. And it's like, okay, well, now if you say that the debt is, if you say that the debt is good, and he's like, yeah, on our business, there are certain types of loans we took out. It's like, okay. But then he says, but the loans, like we never went crazy into debt or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but like when you took out loans, it was probably like being in debt or not is probably like a percentage of your revenue or your assets, right? So you took out more and more and more debt, but it was always like right. And I was like, it was interesting that we think of the U.S. debt, we always think of it in an absolute number.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if we know what the country's assets are, and we don't usually compare to GDP.
Right.
But like, if I was to give you an ordinary person's balance sheet, like if I were to tell you right now, I can tell you a guy who is $10 million in debt, ironically, you'd probably think the person is rich or poor if they were like $10 million in debt.
Rich.
Yeah, exactly. But $10 million in debt, but well,
they
Jesus,
must have a lot.
How do you have $10 million of liability? Yeah, exactly. But that's like very but if I tell you, like, for the United States, we have a debt of like 20 trillion or whatever, it's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But that's like an example of of a thing where it's like people have very strong things, like opinions on things, and they'll have like a factor too, and it's like, well, what does this mean? Another one is like the illegal immigration. Like there's so many things that get repeated. I remember arguing with this guy, and he was like, there's 40,000 illegal immigrants in this country right now with like violent criminal felony records. And I was like, okay, hold on. And he's like, I'm like, there are 40,000 illegal immigrants. He's like, yeah. And it's like, you said they're open borders. They just, it's like, yeah. Nobody's checking these people. And he's like, yeah. How do you know they have criminal records? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you said there are 40,000 people.
Right, that nobody's checked. Yeah.
And there was no answer for that question. I could tell he'd never considered someone in his entire life.
Yeah. I like the what's the best case scenario question. That's another good one to have in your back pocket, is like, what would be your ideal scenario? Because that can also get us out of the level of like whatever, and just like the locked positions and into the goal, to out of the strategy into the goal.
Yeah, something more productive.
Yeah. Well, the goal is something that A, is like the most important question, because that determines what the strategy should be, right? Is the goal. And the goal is also probably something that we agree on more than we might realize. And if the question becomes then what's the best strategy for achieving the goal, that's a completely different question than like your strategy versus mine, just like absent any conversation about what the actual goal is.
Yeah.
So
one very, very, very frustrating thing to me is, so I used to do, like, I've read a bit about ethics, and then at some point I was like, okay, meta ethics is stupid, and no more meta anything. And then, I was like, okay, normative ethics. And then I was like, you know what? Normative ethics is stupid, or whatever. One of the things that I feel like, that there's a whole list of it. Also, don't take anything I say about this. But like, one of the frustrating things is like, people will give me like, there'll be so many challenges like deontologically, where it's like, well, the classic one is like the Nazis knocking at the door, there's a Jew in the basement, do you lie, or whatever. And I've seen like all these esoteric normative applications of where it's like, well, what about threshold deontology? Like, you're a deontologist up to a certain point or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, that kind of sounds like consequential or utilitarianism, essentially. And then on the utilitarian side, people will say things like, okay, well, you're going to kill one person to save 5. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good utilitarian rule, I guess. And like, okay, well, now you have a society where nobody goes to the hospital, because as soon as you go in, they're going to execute you to take your organs to heal everybody. I'm like, okay, shit, you're right. Well, what about, and then they're like, well, there's this thing called rule utilitarianism, where you craft a rule. And it's like, okay, well, this is starting to sound like deontology. You've got like a universal principle or whatever. So fuck normative ethics. All this to say that one of the things that, and it's funny because I used to make fun of virtue ethics or like intuition when it comes to moral stuff. And I'm like, I feel like actually morally, I think intuitively we're like 98% aligned.
Totally, which is part of why I said like there's no foolproof way. It's like you just kind of have to maintain your epistemic humility and keep some kind of contemplative practice that keeps your intuition healthy. Because the second you decide the map is the territory, then you're going to get yourself into real trouble. Yeah. But
then it's frustrating to see how different we feel about things sometimes when it's like, I'm pretty sure like intuitively, like 98% of humans are like about on the same page as everyone else.
Yeah, totally. That and that's also, are you familiar with the phenomenon of the perception gap, of how we just are like seeing completely warped visions of each other online? It's like some of this data might be outdated, but it's like Democrats think that only 30% of Republicans support sensible gun control. It's something like 70%.
Sure.
And like Democrats and Republicans think that like 50% of the other side thinks violence is justified, and it's only like 5%. It's like we're basically fighting with mirages. So much of this is like, again, go back to the social, I don't know if you watched The Social Dilemma, The Netflix documentary. Okay, so I used to work with the Center for Humane Technology, which is the organization at the heart of that film. It's all about how social media is like hijacking human consciousness, basically. But we are not even seeing ourselves clearly online. We are in many cases fighting with it. I use the metaphor of a funhouse mirror. It's like we see the like beauty filtered versions of our tribe, and then the completely like warped versions of the other tribe, and so naturally we're up in arms, but like we don't even know how much we actually agree. So that's why I joke that we're like a happy marriage waiting to happen. We split the polarities. we actually agree more than we realize. So yeah, I think a lot of this would be cleaned up with a different information ecosystem, which it's not that's a very tall order, of course, but I think, I mean, it's like you have to, we apply pressure up and down the leverage. It's not just like we must change the
laws of the corporation,
but I also think designing a new format for debate is also helpful. So I think, it's like just like it all kind of needs to change, but you can focus on whatever domain is yours. And I like the domain of, speaking publicly and engaging in debate and civil discourse, I think is an excellent place to be and push.
I think I feel like there's one big fundamental change that, like, if this could happen, it would be good. I mentioned the Ayn Rand stuff in high school or whatever, and that this like kind of led me to some epistemic humility, because I'm like, okay, I need to not be so influenceable, suggestible or something. I need to not be like so bought in so easily to things. Another thing, just totally by chance, is I took a really good psych class in high school, and I don't know if it was the teacher or if it was the book. It was a book by Zimbardo. I think he did the book.
He was actually my professor at Stanford.
So awesome. Okay. Oh, you didn't like him, or
no, I didn't. No, but it's just insane. I mean, you know about the Stanford prison experiment and everything.
Yeah, I think people don't like the outcomes as much anymore. I don't care though. I like Zimbardo. I think he's a cool guy.
I mean, we learned a lot, but yeah, no. I feel very grateful to have had him as a professor. But anyway.
Yeah, he seems like a cool guy. I don't know if you're about to destroy my impression, but yeah. But the one of the best takeaways that I had from that class, oh my God, it was so important, was how little I should trust my own mind to intuitively or organically arrive at correct, like, empirical determinations. That like there are so many things and so many different ways you remember with such bias, and I realized like I need to have like external auditing questions, right? Like, can I argue both sides of a thing? Have I considered this point of view? Can I and that without these, like, it's very easy to get lost. One of the biggest issues with the we brought up that free speech thing, and then the information environment today, is I think people have this really bad default assumption that truth is this good thing. Like, normatively, it's just ontologically, truth is good, and that human minds are designed to seek and validate truthful things. And so when you look at an information environment, as long as we have all the information out there and more people can add to it, and there's just all the access we have to it, that we're just like, the best answers are always going to like come out. And that is absolutely not true.
No, the opposite has been the case. Yeah. Which obviously has a lot to do with the perverse incentives. But do you feel like you have tips and tricks for yourself to keep yourself in check?
Yeah, for sure.
And you said steel manning. Yeah,
one of them is you should be able to argue both sides of a position very convincingly. Another is that you should always, the question of like, what would it take to convince you that this position isn't correct? For some topics, as I've gotten more and more into reading stuff, I realize like I don't trust summaries on things a lot. Like I don't know if there's anybody in media that I trust to like summarize like legal stuff. Like if it's a Supreme Court decision, I have to read it. One thing I noticed is that for a lot of topics, unfortunately, it's kind of like a diet and exercise. There's not a shortcut. I can't say that anymore. Actually, I guess Ozempic exists, but prior to Ozempic, there's not like a shortcut. Sometimes you just have to like read stuff, as boring as it is.
I think, I think the way I kind of think about it is, I feel like the Greeks had a formula here. They had, first person epistemics, know thyself, know thy lens, know thy bias, like know what you care about, because that will be informing what you decide, what information you decide to like, what facts you cherry pick. There's the know that first person, second person, which you are already articulating, is the be able to articulate the other person's perspective. And then third person is the like actually knowing the world. But we usually only focus on third person when we talk about media literacy or critical thinking. But you actually need to like, you kind of need all three. Like you need to know your own instrument. Yeah. You need to like know the other person's instrument a little bit. And then if you want to know what is going on, you actually need all three of those to some extent. Yeah. So how that plays out, like I haven't seen that. I don't know. I'm not in the realm of education, so maybe that's being more incorporated into critical thinking. But that is something that I've deliberately kind of wanted to design into the anti-debate, even if it's just like at some point during it, just checking in with how you're feeling, and maybe realizing like, oh, I'm really tense, like I'm feeling like angry, or I'm feeling frustrated, or I have a knot in my throat. Like knowing your emotional reaction is going to be probably helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The red flag is always like, try to free yourself from your biases, or I'm unbiased.
For someone saying that?
Yeah. I always tell people, like when I'm doing research, like if I'm going to listen to, somebody wants to do, listen to this video or whatever, it's a Joe Rogan video. I'm like, I'll write like right at the top of the document, I don't like almost everything Joe Rogan has to say about anything. But this is really important because there are times where he'll say things that are true, and my intuition is, I just want to fight against it because he fucking said it, or the guy said it. But there are things they say that can be true, so I know that I have to be a little bit more careful. Like Joe Rogan might say like, did you know that 92% of immigrants have speeding tickets? I'm like, bullshit, no fucking way is that true. But like, okay, hold on. He says it, and if somebody that I agreed with more said it, would I be like, oh, that's an interesting stat, maybe it's true. So I'll like fact check a little bit harder on statements from people that I don't like, because I know, one thing that I stress, this is one of the most important things, is for a variety of reasons, I am just a very independent person. I don't know if it's upbringing, biology, whatever, but I'm a very independent person. And so I have a lot of political freedom as a result of that. And I'm willing to endure a lot of political isolation online. Like I don't like align cleanly with the community, so I kind of fight with everybody. So that's afforded me the flexibility to say things like, I'm very politically independent. But I try to remind people that like, while I can do that, that's because at this point in my career, there's a huge reward in the fact that like this is kind of my brand, and I've already incurred all the punishment for it. So it's whatever, like nobody on a political group likes me. But in a person's individual life, those incentives, the social structures can dictate a lot of your political wiggle room. Like if a new report came out tomorrow that said, we just did the best study in the world, and socialism is the best way to do the government. I'm a huge capitalist, okay? But if that study came out, I'd be like, oh, fuck it then. Let's fucking, how do we get to socialism, right? I don't have a moral attachment to capitalism.
Yeah, it's the strategy, not the goal.
Yeah. I don't lose anything saying that. If that came out and Ben Shapiro saw it, even if he knew it was true, Ben Shapiro is not thinking just like, okay, well, what's the most true thing? He's got to think, okay, am I ready to sacrifice half my audience?
Totally.
Yeah. Which is
well, that's amazing. That's a miracle that you've built an audience like that. I mean,
it's
that's
a thing, yeah.
I mean, no, seriously, because that's the like often what I see happen is an influencer who's like moving, let's say, who's kind of like staking kind of like a synthesis position will they'll often get kind of canceled from whatever it's like if you were on the left but you were canceled by the left, but you're not on the right. You were on the right, you're canceled by the right, you're not on the left. So where are you? You're kind of in the synthesis place. But often they'll get stuck resenting the tribe that canceled them, and then they'll just get
I left the left.
And then and then that devolves into this like vicious cycle of just like anti the thing that I was canceled from. Whereas I think you're in a much better position where you can actually you and your audience can kind of like continue to like, I don't know, it's more of like a virtuous cycle towards, I would say, like greater levels of integration. Like you can actually you are in a very good position to include more perspectives than Ben. He can't, like you just said, like if that report comes out. So
it's good for me, but I don't know how realistic it is.
It's good for all of us.
Yeah, but I just don't know how realistic it is for most people to occupy that position.
Why?
Because the support that you get from tribal stuff is really big. And necessary, I think, for a lot of people. So like
it's hard to know though. It's actually hard to know because I don't think Joe Rogan is very politically pigeonholable.
I think he's very much bought in by the MAGA crowd. Actually, I know that to be true. Yeah, unfortunately.
But I still he's still like, here's another question you can add to your list of like how to get, it's like, what two opinions do you hold that are rarely held together? And I think
that's
Joe
a really good
has
question as well.
I think he has
I don't
those.
think of those. Oh, this is almost Wittgensteinian. I think he does.
You can add that question to your to your toolbox.
I think he does have that, but I think that I tried to stress this. I remember 2 years ago, I was trying to stress this in front of an audience in New York, and everybody's booing at me, and it's funny. People for a long time, they fell into this stupid paradigm of like, they would have these conferences, they bring these people like, look at how many people from the right and left we're bringing together. Like there's so many people from so many different backgrounds that we're bringing together. And there was this illusion of this unity between the right and the left. And I saw this like years ago, and I think anybody who's like, what says, you guys are 100% ideological congruence. You think that you're bringing people from the left and the right together, but it's because the left and right beliefs you have are very outer perimeter beliefs, but you are actually wholly unified in your anti-establishment beliefs. And over the past several years, especially with this whole like populist
it's like
rise,
the horseshoe.
Kind of, yeah. It's really become like a establishment versus anti-establishment game. So if I were to ask somebody like Joe Rogan, or Tim Pool even does this, but like you would ask that question: what two beliefs do you have that aren't commonly held together? Joe Rogan might say something along the lines of like I support Donald Trump, or I think he's got a good idea here for this conservative stuff, but I'm also like really big on like weed legalization, which conservatives traditionally like weren't in favor of. And like that might seem like, okay, that kind of makes sense, but if you look at where the world is now, or if you actually analyze like where the political groups are now, it's probably not as different.
But there's a realignment happening right now.
A little bit, yeah, because of the...
which is so great. It's like, I think it makes wiggle room for new things to happen. I am very pro the realignment. As like weird as it might be that Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala and that RFK and Tulsi Gabbard went over to Trump, like I think it allows room for new things to happen because it's not as cleanly polarized, right?
I feel like what's happening is
I find this moment to be exciting from a synthesis perspective.
I want to agree with you, okay? But I totally disagree. But I wish that was true. Like I think it would be more interesting if it was like like Hillary Clinton and who's your like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, like where you have like these are diametrically differently opinioned people, and to see them come together and agree on something would be interesting. But when I see like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, these are just solidly anti-establishment people, and the fact that they would align with like people on the right who are also right now solidly anti-establishment, I guess in my mind it looks like a faux kind of like realignment, when in reality these people are like aligned on like not, because
totally. And maybe maybe that is the realignment, is instead of progressive conservative, it's establishment anti-establishment, which I think is like, I think that could be helpful.
Maybe
for a season.
Sure.
Yeah. I just want to share this one anecdote that you might appreciate, given that you said you've already alienated everybody. There's this but okay, maybe this is like the last nerdy thing to share, and then so there's this framework that forgive me, it's going to sound okay, so it's called the spiral dynamics of consciousness. Have you ever heard of this?
I have not, but go ahead.
Okay, so the idea is so the person who developed it was actually a contemporary of Maslow's. Do you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay. Yeah. So this guy, his name is Claire Graves, and he developed this system for how human beings evolve over time. Both human beings, like an individual human being, and humanity over the course of evolution. And he identified different stages of evolution, and Maslow himself was like, damn, this is amazing. But he died before he was able to really publish it. So we are more left with Maslow than we are left with spiral dynamics of consciousness. Anyway, it strikes, it's like anyone who's kind of like anti-hierarchical won't love this thing, because like, what do you mean? Like, we go through different phases and some people are more evolved than others. It's like, yeah, that is what I'm saying. Like civilizations that that believe in human rights are more evolved. And we can just say that. And if you can't say that, then then you can't say anything. Then why do you care about anything? Because you can't actually make a claim about any value being more valuable than another. Anyway.
Usually the funny thing on that, just real quick, the people that believe that, I think that's always immediately self-defeating, because the same people that will say one civilization or culture can never be better than another one are always people that are pushing for cultural or civilizational change.
Totally.
Like, well, isn't the civilization that you're pushing for better than the one we're in now?
Totally. So it's like, which is very hypocritical. Nothing is better than anything else except for the fact that what I'm saying is better. Okay. So, but that, by the way, is a stage. That whole thing is a stage in the evolution. It's called the sense. So there are different stages, and that one is, I'm going to just super simplify. Let's just say, because what's helpful about this is that it, there's so many things that are helpful, but part of it is like, we don't have to, like, a 9-year-old is not a defective 12-year-old. Right? We can just like appreciate a 9-year-old for being a 9-year-old and a 12, and we can kind of understand. But one nice thing that this framework does is that it instead of thinking in terms of left and right and red and blue, there are actually different stages we're working with. And if we were going to collapse them, let's say there's the traditional, modern, and then postmodern. And postmodern is, and we could say like shadow of postmodern is woke, gone off the deep end. But the non-shadow, the light of it is like, thank you for waking us up to the plight of marginalized people everywhere. Like, thank you for introducing the oppressor-oppressed frame. Is it always the most relevant frame with which to see a given situation? No. But thank you, because we needed that frame to come online. But anyway, so it's instead of like red and blue, what spiral dynamics kind of like allows you to see is that it's actually it's traditional and progressive, and modern is split, and the modern that is with the traditional is like the more establishment side, and the modern that is with of that wing, and the modern that's with the progressive is the establishment side of that wing, you could say. Does that make sense?
Keep talking.
Well, it helps us understand why there's a schism in the right and in the left. Gotcha. Because the right is a mixture of traditional and modern, and the left is a mixture of modern and progressive. Okay. But let's just throw that out the window for a second, because the thing that I actually wanted to tell you was, okay, so there's a joke in spiral dynamics that like, okay, what if you invited them all to a party, what would happen? So the traditional and the modern and progressive like can't stand each other, right? Because like the traditional is like we shouldn't be drinking and everyone should be whatever, and then the modern is like doing like like trying to defeat everybody with the keg stands, and the progressive is like, oh, but we need safe words and consent and blah blah blah. And the integral, which is the instead of my way right, your way is wrong, is the like, wow, look at all these ways and which one is useful in different circumstances, and some of them are better and some of them are worse, but I'm able to hold them all together. They don't understand the integral person at the party, but they dislike them the least. Okay. So that's that's what you gain. You're like least disliked by the majority of people who cannot agree on anything else. Gotcha. Congratulations. That was a lot of, okay. To get to the, Well,
I understand in theory how that works, but I just kind of feel like the most disliked by everybody, but thanks for the...
No, but you're probably, you're less disliked than somebody that they really hate.
No, yeah, that's probably true, yeah.
So you're least disliked.
Sure. Yeah. Or even if I am the most disliked, the way that they most dislike me is always by invoking the worst type of person that they're trying to associate me with, but if they were fighting the other person, I would never be invoked as like, you're just like, so I'll take that. Okay.
There you go. Congratulations.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Or any other jokes,
nerdy
thoughts, concepts?
I mean, there's an infinity of it. No, I think we can leave it at that. If you're interested in spiral dynamics, I can definitely send you. Sure. I find these things very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess before we close out, do you have like a dream person that like if I could talk to or do an anti-debate with?
If you could, if you could, I mean, I think that's more a question for you. Like I do want one about AI between Elon and someone. His name is Daniel. Do you know who Daniel Schmachtenberger is?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay. Well, so I think AI is an urgent one that needs to happen.
Okay.
But honestly, I think that's a better question for you, is just like who is it time? It may be kind of weird to say it this way, but it's like, who is it time to integrate with? Who is it time?
Trump. I need to. I'm just kidding.
I don't think he's really like up to the task. I would do it with someone who can really engage, and who we like. It will be an edifying experience for everyone.
Sure. Okay.
So I think the people you've named are perfect, like you and Ben Shapiro on free speech or whatever your issue of choice is. Mm-hmm. And I think it will do like a real service.
Okay.
Yeah.
If people are looking for you, where do you want to direct people to?
Yes, people can find me on Twitter at Steph Lepp. You can find Faces of X at facesofx.org. Mm-hmm. And I'll keep you posted when there's an anti-debate ready to be anti-debated.
Yeah, if you need me to moderate one or debate one, just let me know.
I would love both. And I have a friend who I told I was coming here, and she wants to host a live one at her house in LA. So FYI.
I go to LA a lot, so yeah. Sounds good. Okay, cool. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you. And thank you for making room for different perspectives. It's really helpful, and we need it. So I'm grateful to you.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
The news is divided. Ground News puts it back together, so you can see how many sources are reporting on any breaking story, where they fall on the political spectrum, how reliable they are, and who owns them. Compare headlines and read full articles to see which details are prioritized, exaggerated, or left out entirely. Because the more we understand the media, the more we'll understand each other. Visit ground.news to learn more.